Well, welcome and happy May Day. And thanks for joining me to learn about making a simple hand-built cylinder. And the reason I like doing these is twofold. A, because it practices some hand building skills and techniques that I'm going to show you, some tools that I have found very useful, but also it doubles as an opportunity to test glazes. And here's one that I made, and I used a cheese slicer to kind of get these flat areas. And then you can see how I've been experimenting with glazes. And I've dipped the mug halfway down over some of these hand painted glazes in white, and then this is where it fell in the bucket and it got all white, but it doesn't matter. It was a test and it worked out because I was thankful to be able to see what happens when it drips and when it does all those things. But it also gave me an opportunity to try out some tools. I had a cheap cheese slicer that I had ordered from a Pottery Supply, and it was cheap and it wasn't great, but it did have an adjustable wire for to be able to adjust how deep you cut into your clay. But I've got another one to show you this, but then in addition to that, I'm going to show you a fluting tool that we can also use, and I'll continue to show you some of the things I've been playing around with. But to begin with, let's go ahead and talk about making the cylinder, because from that, there's all sorts of possibilities. And it is a simple structure. It doesn't take up a lot of space. Here I've got my slab prepared, but I'm going to tell you what I did was I made two at a time. And from my block of clay, I took a big, thick chunk. I probably went down an inch or maybe a little over an inch, and I pulled that out so that I had myself a nice, thick slab of clay. And I was able to work that into a width and a length that would make two cylinders. Because if you're gonna make one, you might as well make two while you're at it, and you're cutting off the clay off your block of clay anyway. So let me explain to you how you get your dimension for your cylinder. Now I made my cylinder, here it is, out of one of these. I used this as a mold. It's an old jar of glaze, and I liked the circumference of it, and also I liked the fact that I'd be able to take the lid off and get my hand in there to be able to pull it out later. So that's what I'm going to be demonstrating today. But I've done others, and I used a cylinder. This is a big jar of adhesive that I use in my multimedia room. You can find anything. The one thing I would caution you on is getting something that's too narrow, because you can't get your hands down in there. Of course, the narrower and the taller it gets, it becomes very hard to get your hands in there. So this is a good manageable size, especially since I only went up about 4 inches. And that's what I did, is I took a piece of craft paper. You can use, a shopping bag to get your paper, but I happen to have a lot of this, drop paper for painting or anything that it has a little bit of substance to it. Newspaper might be a little bit too thin and kind of get too wet too quickly. So this craft paper is what I use to use not only as my template, but then it also becomes my guard, so it doesn't stick to this plasticky surface. So in order to get my template, I measured out a long strip, and I went at 4 inches. You can go up taller, you can go up shorter. And so I made a long strip based on knowing that I was going to want not only the length to be able to cover this diameter, but also I wanted extra. So what I did was I got my long strip, and I took it and I went around and I let it overlap, and I made a little mark where it, you can see my mark here where I've made a pencil mark where it touches, where it just exactly meets. And then I added 1.25 inches. And the 1.25 inches is so that I can make bevels on either side of the cylinder, and I won't lose that. So So go ahead and make those markings. Take your long strip of paper and make the marking, and then you can cut it. And I use a right angle to get a nice right angle cut. Now I use this as my template in order to cut my piece of slab. I've rolled this out already. You can use a rolling pin. I also have one of these little pony rollers if you don't have one of those. If you have access to a slab roller, that is the way to go. You can get your 2 slabs cut out. I would probably go 3/8 of an inch, either eyeballing it if you're rolling it out by hand, or if you have a slab roller, you can set that dial to 3/8 of an inch. You want it a little bit thicker if you're going to be cutting out and scoring out. And you can experiment with that. You know, if you want to go a little thicker, a little thinner, I would err on the side of thicker to begin with until you get used to how much clay you're taking away and you don't accidentally then go through to the back. And if you do, it's not a big deal. Another reason why I like to make 2 at a time, because you're experimenting and you're learning a new technique. It's always nice to have a second go at something. So I've already rolled that out using my roller. You can smooth it out. This is another little handy tool that I love. These little red rubber ribs, they smooth. And I've smoothed both sides. And then I can take my template and cut it out. I've kind of got this straight edge already here left over from my other cut, because I've been making a couple of these. You can use a needle tool to cut. You can use a little knife to cut. You could use a fettling knife to cut. I mean, it's simple to just use a needle tool, drawing along the edges of your template as your guide. And every now and again, if I remember, I'll take it and I'll go from the ends and not go out. Sometimes we'll stretch the clay. So go to the end in. So basically the ends and in, so that you don't get that little bit of clay that wants to stretch out. There you go. You've got your clay. In fact, I'm going to show you how thick that is too. It's probably right at 3/8 of an inch thick. I've got my little slab now that will be wrapping around my cylinder. I'm going to turn it this way so you can see how I make my cuts a little bit better. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this around. I'm getting the bottom edge lined up with the bottom edge. And I'm going to try to get this on here nice and tight so it doesn't slip around. Getting that on there, and I have a piece of tape ready so I can just tape this. And now it's ready to be wrapped around. Before I wrap it around, I'm going to bevel the 2 ends. Remember how we made it a little longer so that we could have extra clay in order to bevel? This is another tool that I love when I'm constructing boxes or any kind of hand building project. Really, it comes in handy. It's a tool by Xiem, X-I-E-M, and it's a bevel tool. And here you can see a 45-degree angle, and here's one that's a little bit more. I typically use just the 45-degree angle, and it's really, really nifty because you can line up your edge of your clay here right to the bottom here, and I usually hold my thumb on the back side and you just drag it along the edge of the clay, and it cuts this nice perfect 45-degree angle off of the end of your clay. I don't throw this away. I dip it in a piece of water, or a bowl of water. I always have my little water kind of handy here. I dip it in water so it doesn't dry out, and I'm actually going to reuse it. You'll see how I reuse it later. Now I do the same thing on the opposite side, and I have to flip it over. I'm going to show you how, if you don't have one of these bevel tools, you can use a knife. And I usually do it on this side because I'm right-handed and I like to pull toward myself. So you just have to then use your little knife blade, or you could even use a needle tool. And you have to create and hold that 45-degree angle a little bit more steadily because you don't have anything to guide it. And you would drag it across. Now, it would be the opposite side, but I would start, on this side and then flip it over and then do the other side. So let me just explain again in case I confused you. I did this side here with this tool. And now I'm going to flip it over and do it on this side again with this tool. The reason I didn't demo it this way is because I like to pull toward me, but I like to use my right hand. So, but basically you're making your bevels on opposite sides. So I flipped it and I'm making it another one here, taking it and dipping it in a little bit of water so that it stays nice and moist. I've got my two beveled edges. The other tool I like to have handy is a little scored serrating rib in order to make my little hatch marks. If you don't have one of these serrated ribs, you can use a needle tool. A needle tool will absolutely work for anything. This just kind of is a little faster. The other thing, I don't know if you can notice, but my clay is really soft. And when you work with super soft clay, you don't need a lot of water. You don't need slip. I definitely score, but because it's soft enough, these two edges are going to join well anyway. If you want to add a teeny bit of water, you can, but to me, the water just kind of loosens and weakens, and the idea, in order for it to get to a nice rectangular or upright cylinder, you want it to stiffen so that you can continue to work with it. All right, you're ready to roll it over your mold, your little, in my case, a little empty glaze bottle. And I'm just pulling this back end up, and I'm kind of trying to keep it nice and tight. Turn this a little bit more so you can see. I'm just rolling it along that bottom edge. And now I'm picking up this, and you can see that my clay has actually shrunk a little bit overnight. I set this up yesterday and wrapped it, but it has actually, because normally I have this just coming over this. So instead, no problem, I'm going to roll it back out. I'm going to take my roller and I'm going to give it just an extra little bit of length, because I want that seam to be nice and strong. And if I don't have enough clay, then there will be a weakness there. And I can always add clay, but because I hadn't joined it, I can just go ahead and take it back. I added a little bit of length. So I was trying to be prepared, and I did that slab last night. I wrapped it really well, but it is funny how these conditions, at least where I am right now, my things are drying out pretty quickly. All right, back to rolling it along, picking it up. Let's see if it joins, has a little bit more. Yeah, I've got definitely the right amount of length there. Like I was talking about, not only does it meet, but it kind of goes over a little bit, which is good. I want the extra clay there. I can always take it off, but I don't want a weakness in that joint. So now what I do is I kind of use my hands to mold it over. Once it starts to stick, it sticks quickly. I told you this clay, when it's nice and damp, it will quickly grab onto each other. You can see I have a little extra overlap there, and I will just take my fingers and work it. I'll be able to do the same thing on the inside when I remove this little jar. So working it with my fingers, I also will take my little red, and I'll not only work it here, but I'll work it where it's joined. It will, by moving this upward, it will make the clay grow the height up here a tiny bit, and I can always remove that later. So it's kind of going up, and it's also going over to the side. My finger and my rib. Maybe my finger gets in there a little bit more, and then my rib can go back out and smooth it out. So I'll worry about smoothing more of that later and getting that seam to sort of disappear. See how easily it disappears, but even the extra clay. See a little bit how it gained a little bit of height. Okay, it's on. The other thing I did forget to tell you is that in your length of clay, leave a little bit of extra room for your bottom, and I did not. So I'm going to have to go back and make my bottom because I didn't leave enough here. I could probably gain enough length out of that by just rolling it, because the bottom does not need to be as thick as the sides. You're not going to be taking any clay away from the bottom. So let's see, I've got a ways to go. So I'm going to have to patch this, which is not a problem. I'm going to take another piece of clay and I will attach it. And here's how easily you can do that to get your bottom piece. I put these two together. I let that be big, go way over that seam so that it will have plenty of room to smear out. And then on the back, plenty of room to smear out, and then compressing it so that they're nice and joined. And then smoothing it out a little bit more. And getting it flat. Okay, now I have the little piece for my bottom. So another quick lesson in joining pieces if you don't have enough room. All right, so what I do next is I put my little cylinder on here, and I just take my rib tool, which fell on the floor, and draw a line. I don't cut all the way through, I just draw a little line so that I see where I need to score. Take that away and score in the inside part of that line. It doesn't matter if it goes out. I just do like to be able to see that line, to be able to put it back down roughly on that area. This is a time that I will add just a drop. When I say a drop, I pick it up with my little serrated rib tool, and then I scratch it back down in there. And we are talking minimal. Too much water, I mean, it's one of those things, too much water and it just will get sloppy. That's all you need. Take this back. I can still see the line where it went, lining it up, kind of working it down, pushing it down, and now I do cut. Now I will go ahead and cut, and I can use my needle tool or I can use my knife. You can go straight down or you can kind of go at an angle. Every now and again, I like to go at a slight angle, kind of getting in a small undercut so that your bottom is not completely falling into. You'll end up doing more of that modifying later. But giving it a small undercut, going all the way around. I could have this on my banding wheel, but I have it on this board. These drywall boards are nice. I started out with a big one, and I'll probably now go to a smaller one. Take that away. Go to a smaller board now so I can turn it a little bit more easily. So that I gently picked that up. It did stick. The board is also getting a little bit damp, so it's nice to be able to switch to a drier board. I have all different sizes, and I have them usually out and available when I'm doing hand building, so that I can bring in a new dry board. I flip them over and I change them out because it will get the moisture out of your clay, which is good. So now I've got the bottom is attached, but I'm going to give it an extra little help by tapping it down and making sure that that really seats in there nicely. Smooth it out a little bit. And I'm ready to remove the inside mold that I had. I like this little glazed one because I can get my hand in there and pull it out. Your paper will stay behind, and all you have to do is peel it off and it will come out. This will dry up quickly, and if you need to put it back over your mold and stick it back in to kind of give it a little bit of reshaping, you can do that. There, I went over there. So if I want to be able to get that back in there for any kind of reshaping, I can. I don't know how well you can see this, but my inside edges can use a tiny bit of reinforcement down there. And that's where I take these little beveled edges that I've taken off the ends, and I'd wet them, and they're nice and soft now. And I like them nice and soft because they're going to act like a little glue or caulk, or, you know, just a little reinforcing for that inside edge. And this will probably be enough to make it all the way around. I've got the other piece if I needed a tiny bit more. So what I do is I put this thing in my hand, and I kind of, it's in my hand so that when I go to stick it in there, it doesn't adhere to the side of my cylinder, but it's in my hand, and I use these two fingers to kind of work it down. I can use this hand to pick it back up, but these fingers kind of work it in, and this hand can act as a feeding line too. So I get to the tip and I place it down right into the side. This is where the banding wheel would come in handy, because then I could turn the banding wheel. I'm going to do that. Let's see if I can get that up on here. And I put a little piece of paper down because this clay is sticky. So there we go again. I am placing it down in the corner, and then I can turn it with this hand too. Turn the banding wheel and then feed a little bit more clay around. Turn it. I've got it all out of this hand now, and now this hand is left to feeding it down in there. I have maybe 2 inches left, so I'll grab a little bit from that other piece. I'll use this hand because it's this side, and I'll just lay that in there. That was easy. So now my coil is just laid down on the inside bottom edge, and I'm going to take my right hand, my finger, and I'm going to compress it and smooth it in there while I'm turning the wheel and supporting with this hand. I'm pushing a little bit more down into the bottom than I am out to the sides, so you don't get a bow out here. If you do, you can always smooth it out later, but right now I'm just kind of smoothing it down and just a little bit into the sides. You can always smooth a little bit more later. The other thing I'm going to do now is take this inside seam, if you can see that one where we joined it, and you can see that it needs a little bit of smoothing. Let's see if I can do this. Tip it, and maybe the paper will hold it. So I'm holding my thumb out here as a support, and my finger on the inside is kind of pulling that in and smoothing it out and smoothing it into the clay. I'm gonna have to hold this down and use my hand now so I can get down to the bottom and smooth that over. You can use your little red rib in there too. I like to use the curved edge to not only go up, but also continue smoothing that clay inward. And this is where I would probably then take an opportunity to smooth all the way around again. Maybe a little excess at the bottom, tapping it in and pulling it up. You're about there. You know, I will probably work on this top area. You can see where that extra clay is wanting to come up, and it's very easy to just cut it off. You can cut it off now, or you can cut it off when it's a little bit more leather hard. Get it nice and even across the top. I have one other tool that I love. It's not a commercial tool. It's a tool that one of my old pottery teachers makes and sells, and he makes them out of wood. But it's great for this kind of thing because I can use it to smooth out this, kind of round out this top edge. And actually, it's still a little soft to be doing this, but I'm going to show you how I do it either with this, or you can also use your kind of curving your little red rib and go around the edges. This is an area where there's like a little bit of a lump. I probably extended that clay length just a hair more than I would have liked. I wouldn't have to do so much of this smoothing right here in order for it to look like there's no seam. I don't want it to look like I made a seam. It needs to look invisible. So I had to go and spend a little bit of extra time to take care and get rid of that. So you're basically done. You know, you can smooth all day, but it's easier to just wait until it becomes a little bit more leather hard to do that. Smooth a little bit here on the bottom by gently picking it up, smoothing it on the bottom. And if you want, one last time, you could put this back in. You needed to, if for some reason you got a little bit of a bow at the bottom or your cylinder got a little bit off, you can put it back in here and you can kind of get it to reshape a little bit. So that's it. I've got my nice cylinder, and this will set up. This will now need to set up. In fact, I have one that's been setting up overnight. I made this one yesterday so I can show you the next step. And it is nice, and I mean, it is completely leather hard. This is still very flimsy. And I'm gonna go ahead and just set this one aside and let it continue to do its magic of stiffening up while I show you how to use a little fluting tool. I've got several fluting tools. I'm gonna show you the cheese cutter, but bear with me if it doesn't work because it's just a normal cheese cutter that I picked up from Target. And that's how I created that this original one, but it just was not, it was falling apart. So I picked up another one. I'm gonna try it. And then I'm gonna show you another Xiam tool that has 3 different attachments for fluting. And this is the smallest, medium, and the biggest. And you can see that you can get all shapes. You can get, in fact, this was one I just played with. And then I threw some stamps on it. But I think that's the medium. Here's the small. And you get a little bit of everything. This is one that this was my very first one. And it was really thick to begin with. You can see how thin it is now. And I just had fun. After a while, I just got into the hang of, and I was like, I need to stop or I'm going to go through the clay. But I took all of them and I experimented with all of them and practiced. And I got the feel. I can use, this is another test glazing little cylinder as well. But this one that I created, I'm going to show you how and it has to be nice and, you don't want any stickiness, nice and leather hard. The reason I've moved it over here to this side now is because you need it's mandatory. You need follow through. And if you're going to your table and your hand stops at a table, it won't work. You need to know that you've got this flow going all the way down the side and then off to the bottom. And do not hesitate. You just kind of, once you start, you just pull down. This one yesterday, as I was practicing, it hung up a couple of times. I'm going to see if it might not have to do with the fact that it was a tiny bit tacky. This is really nice and leather hard, so we're going to see if this works a little bit better. So I'm going right below. I'm not going right up to the top. You could, but I choose to have a little bit of reveal at the top. And I'm setting my cutter at an angle. I'm pushing in, and it did not work. Nope. Nope. No. So I think you need one with a smaller spacing between the wire and the roller. All right, we're going to try one more time, and then we're going to go on to the fluting tool. Okay, there it worked. So I could continue to do that, but I'm not excited about this tool right now. I'm going to put it on equal sides to give it maybe 2 more tries, and then I'm going to go to the fluting tool. Maybe I did need to start at the rim and go down. And we'll do 1 more. Okay, I started to get the hang of it. As you can see, it takes practice, and the right tools always are like mandatory. So I've got 3 sides that have that, and the rest of it I'll show you this fluting tool by the same company as I am, who makes the little cutter for your angle. I'm going to use the larger one. This opens up so that you can slide down your new size, and then it screws back in so that you've got it in there nice and tight. So if I want to have something a little bit more symmetrical, I'll go ahead and use this on either side of those 2 cutters. And I'll start and use the same exact strong motion down without hesitating, just pulling down. So that was on either side of my little cut edge. I'll do that 1 more time on this one. 1, and making sure that this is off the base. 2, and we'll just do 1 over here. And I'll do 1 in the middle. And maybe the 1 in the middle here. Feels really good. It's one of those things that once you've practiced it a few times and you have the right state of dryness, it pulls out really nicely. Let's go to the medium one now, and I'll add just a few more lines. I'll add the lines. Do I want to be strategic, or do I just want to, maybe I'll just add the lines on either side of what I just did. It feels great. It's a fun tool to play around with. That's the other reason it's kind of nice to have more than one of these things prepared at a time, because once you get going, you want to do it again. So, and sometimes, you have to be prepared that the first one may not even work out at all. So there I've got some texture, some lines, and the main thing at this point is that I've created some lines in order to place some glazing. Here's one that I did that I was very strategic. I actually put some little circles in the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. I use this little stamp that I have here, and I put these. So now that is going to be, yes, decorative, but inside the circles, I have labeled them. I actually started with Roman numerals, and then I went to ABC, and I'll start to consider using this as my little glaze pattern. So I'll use in a notebook, I'll reference like D is this glaze, and we'll get to that in the next week. But if you want to prepare a cylinder or 2 for testing glazes, that's the next thing I'm going to talk about. Because like everything, a big part of it is trial and error. So I found that having these cylinders, practicing your hand building skills, trying out different tools, trying out glazes, trying out. Speaking of trying out, another thing that you can do, if your cylinder is nice and thick to begin with, you can reshape it. You've got all this extra clay at the top. You can pull, you can pinch, you can put your finger in there and use, this is a stamp that I made earlier, and I held my finger in and stamped, so I kind of got a little bit of movement out and around. And you can manipulate your cylinder if you've got that extra thickness to it. You can add texture to it. I used a little bubble wrap mold that I had made on this one. Did the same thing. You don't use as much smoothing. It's more of just kind of tapping it into place. This was a much thinner cylinder to begin with, because I knew that I wasn't going to be scoring and taking any off. So I didn't have to have quite as much of an overlap as I did with the other one. Here's another one that I made out of another mold that I had. I make these disc molds out of different textures and shapes, and I rolled my slab into that and then used that to wrap around the cylinder when I was done. So I'm going to do one more with the smallest, and then I will turn it over for questions. Whoops, that one went off to the side. I'm not being very mindful. Down, go down. That's it. If you want to go back in and recreate that little angle at the bottom, you can use your knife to go in and give it a little bit of that lift off the table, creating a angled bottom and then smoothing it out. See how much easier it is to work with the clay when it's in a leather hard state. And then just smoothing it out. You want to go back in and add some texture, some little lines up, smooth out the top a little bit more. There you go.